Welcome back, everybody. I'm your host, Bruce.
And I'm your host, Pete.
And we are The Epic Experiment.
If you're new to the show, we talk about all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on primarily playing Commander.
Our show is available on thelotuscouncil.com, your favorite podcast apps, and a variety of social media platforms.
If you want to reach out to us, check the show notes below for our contact information.
Now, on with the show.
Let's get after it. That reminds me, on Friday I drafted for the first time in a very long time, and we drafted Return to Ravnica. So it got me thinking about what we could talk about on the show.
It's a good one.
And we were thinking about just how Draft and Limited compares to Commander and how you can learn from these things and stuff by playing both formats. But we'll come to that in a second. We're going to do our favorite segment. Of course, Garbage or Great. Bruce, what do you got for us first?
Okay, this card is an interesting card because it was printed in the one of the Commander decks from Kaldheim, and so it only has a single printing, was kind of overlooked. So it's called Ethereal Valkyrie, and it's 4 white blue for a 4/4 Spirit Angel with flying. Here's the interesting text: whenever Ethereal Valkyrie enters the battlefield or attacks, draw a card, then exile a card from your hand face down. It becomes Foretold. Its foretell cost is its mana cost reduced by 2 generic mana. What do you think? Is this something people should be paying attention to? Is this sort of ability people want in their decks?
I think low-key it's good because well, first let me start with the simple stuff, right? So it's a Spirit Angel, so it's 2 archetypes, 2 creatures, types that are very much supported in Magic, in the history of Magic. You can play it in a Spirit Tribal deck, Angel Tribal, or Typal, I believe, yeah. And it's a flying 4/4. I know it's 6 mana, but it enters and it draws you a card immediately, and then it reduces the next spell you cast. So even if it gets killed in response, you still get to foretell a card and play it for cheap later. I think that's actually low-key very powerful. Especially even if you never get to attack with it. My only downside would be okay, you don't get to attack with it, but in those colors, especially, flickering is very common. Being able to recur the creature in white is very plausible now. And if you bounce it back to hand, you still get the effect anyway. So if you wanted to instant speed save it, you still get the trigger on the stack. It doesn't go away unless it's stifled. So I think that's pretty nice. Anything that ETBs and draws a card to me is always kind of premium. So what do you think?
So can I just go through a little bit of a thought experiment with you? So how much mana would I be prepared to pay to draw a card in Commander? What is the going rate for drawing a card? Is it 2 mana? It's not 1 mana. It's never 1 mana. So
I think to draw 1 card, you're usually paying at least 1 mana per card.
Well,
if we're looking at it, you're probably paying 1 mana per card, unless you have an effect that allows you to draw a ton of cards, for 5 mana in green, right? You draw cards with the greatest power you control, then your rate's a lot higher, right? But I think the average is probably 1 or 2 mana per card. I mean, Harmonize is an example. You draw 3 cards for 4.
Yeah. So, the Divination cost, pay 3 for 2. Well, Brainstorm's weird because you're
just drawing 1 card for 1, if that makes.
Brainstorm, you net 1 card, but Brainstorm's a weird one because of the fact of all the games you can play with it. So I don't think that's a great example. But Divination or the instant speed equivalent is 3 mana, draw 2 cards. So you're a mana and a half per card is sort of the going rate. So if you think you're getting a mana and a half of card just in the draw a card ability, and then the rest of this is 4.5 mana for a 4/4 Flying Angel that has an extra ability attached to it. Would I interest you in that sort of? That's oftentimes when I break down cards. I look at
a Sarah's Angel with a draw card attached to it, pretty much.
Yeah, and would I be down for that sort of thing? And I think I probably would be. And I think when you add in things like it's a creature, it can be recurred, it can be bounced, it can be flickered. It gives you a lot. It can wear equipment. It can do all sorts of interesting things for you. You don't want a lot of this effect in your deck.
Sure.
Because 6 mana is expensive to be spending on a card that isn't going to immediately slam the door shut and win you the game. but I don't have a problem playing this in a couple of decks, and taking advantage of the synergy that this could create. So I'm pretty on board. I think this is a pretty cool card. I like it as a very budget conscious option too. It's only 27 cents if you're looking to pick one up for a blue-white deck of your choosing. So I really like it on the price point too, because that's often something that I figure when I'm doing my calculations for a deck. Like, can I afford this sort of card, or do I need to go to the next variant up? It costs me $2 or $3. I think I can safely say I would, be prepared to say I could put this in my deck quite happily and not be embarrassed. So I'm pretty on board. I mean, sometimes you and I don't always agree, but I think this sort of one is pretty neat effect. I'm pretty on board.
Also, if we're looking at hint, hint, wink, wink, next set coming up very soon, there's many cards that do payoffs for that. I'm not going to mention any of them yet until they release, but there's definitely some applicability in those colors that you can take advantage of. The other thing is, even if you only get to do this once and you get to put an impactful spell out of your hand out of the way for later, it's hard for people to interact with Foretell in general because of the timing rules for it.
Yeah.
And they don't know what you foretold, so it's like there's that ticking time bomb that might be there. Even if it'd be weird if you put like an Arcane Signet down because it's free. You can cast it for free.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or like if you're playing a deck that like Vega the Watcher, right? That comes to mind as like a on-color card combination that allows you to draw an additional card eventually later. If you're playing a control strategy, I think this is a good finisher for me.
Right.
You're playing
I'm looking at it here in terms of like what other commanders it goes in. Well, obviously it goes with the pre-con commander Raynar the Everwatchful, but some other cards it synergizes really nicely with. So Vega, which is with the uncommon from Kaldheim, plays really nicely with this. Errant and Giada is another one that allows you to take advantage of this.
Yes.
And that's a very budget-friendly commander that you can want to play. There's Brago, King Eternal, obviously, if you want to do Brago stuff. And then like some other ones, like Millicent doesn't surprise me because that's another one that I think was in the same deck or similar. That
was the Crimson Val Commander precons. I remember because I bought them. Right. But like making it only cost 2 mana means that you're 2 mana for a card and foretelling a card seems pretty good.
Yeah, and then Asika, God of the Tree. I'm like, really? Asika plays this? Interesting enough, but it doesn't appear overly prevalently, but it does appear. So anyway, I think those are some interesting options of where it could go. I think this is actually a pretty good card, sneaky good, and I think people are going to be surprised at the mileage they get out of it.
Yep, that's what we like, That's what we enjoy. The next card.
What do you find today? Oh, what is this?
This is a dirtbag card.
It is a dirtbag card.
This card is called Mana Maze. If you're not from the era of 2001, then you probably don't know what this card is. It's a colorless in blue. I didn't know what this card was. I just kind of found it as I was looking for the old school stacks pieces. Players can't cast... So it's a colorless in blue. Players can't cast spells that share a color with the spell most recently cast this turn.
This is like putting stacks on its ear. Like, this is super mean. So first off, like, this probably shuts out a monocolored deck, so they only get to play 1 spell a turn. That's hard. It probably also means that a 2-color deck can't play too much because it's hard to sequence your spells properly out of your deck. Like, and when you start getting to 3-colored spells, you're playing things that have got gold-colored spells and the like, so you're really having a hard time negotiating this. So, I mean, this is an interesting stacks piece without it being a super oppressive one that's going to draw a lot of immediate hate. I think your opponents are going to let this one stick on the field for a while before they realize that how much chaos is causing to their game plan. So I think in terms of application, what it does to your opponents is real and tangible and is something that people need to be considering.
This reminds me of Leer, not in the sense that you get some extra benefit for things not being countered, but it prevents counter spells from working effectively. Because if I casted a blue spell and then someone else wanted to counter it, they can't counter it anymore.
Right. Yeah.
So it's just a weird anti-counter spell sort of effect. And the only downside I see is, of course, you have to figure out what you're able to play. Because if you cast this and you don't really understand the interaction, you could really 2-for-1 yourself.
Well, you pointed out a really interesting interaction we were talking before the show. Is that things that are colorless don't get impacted by that?
That's right. It's not a color. Yeah.
But get this: morphs and disguise cards.
Right.
Like that. Like you can circumvent this pretty. Yeah, cloaking, morphing, manifesting, all that stuff.
All of that. Yes.
Makes colorless cards that are not impacted by this sort of effect. And so, like if you're looking playing Kadena or you're looking to play Vanifar from MKM that makes the disguise creatures, like you've got some really interesting tools to build a funky deck that's going to slow your opponents down, but not hamper you in the least. So that sort of gives it some extra applicability.
Are you ready for the most common commanders that they're being used in?
What do you got here? What do we got here?
Okay, the first one is really spicy. Blind Seer. Blind Seer is 2 colorless, 2 blue. It's a card I actually wanted to feature on the show in the future, but it's a colorless and blue. Target spell or permanent becomes the color of your choice until end of turn.
That is a weird esoteric card. Good heavens.
Yep. The next one is more fun because it reduces the colored mana, but I don't see why mana maze would make sense. Maybe because it's colorless itself?
Well, yes, Morphon isn't impacted by it.
Even if you only spend colorless mana on something, it still would get messed up by this.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly.
Unless they're playing Morphon Morph or something. But that doesn't make sense.
Morphon Eldrazi, maybe?
Maybe, yeah, that makes sense too. Emery is the other one, which makes sense as an artifact combo deck. Azure the Enchanter is another enchantment combo deck, cheating things out so you're not casting spells. It's the 4-mana Azure combo deck. And Zedru the Great-Hearted, which, that's kind of funny. You give it to an opponent, and then they're trying to get rid of it, but you get to draw cards off of it, so it's kind of neat.
Yeah.
A lot of those cards, they do that. And Vanifar is a new card being featured with it, so I understand why that would potentially do it. A lot of Eldrazi type cards like Herald of Kozilek, Brood Monitor, From Beyond, a lot of those spells that say they are colorless, which makes sense with Mana Maze. And then, I'm not surprised by any of this stuff per se.
This is a neat card, though. This is a really interesting card, and people are going to look at this, I think, and double take and say, "Can I read that?" And then they're not going to really truly process what this means.
The caveat too is that it doesn't say counter the spell; it just says it can't be played. So it would just fizzle anyway. So it doesn't get countered; it just doesn't resolve.
Oh wow! So it doesn't even. It's not even like hexproof, where like when hexproof. You can't do it. So like it doesn't. I don't think it fizzles. You just cannot do it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it's cool. I think it's a neat card. I think if you build around it in an appropriate way, you're going to end up with a really interesting build, and your opponents are going to go, "What does this happen to us? Why did we get slowed down so significantly?" And Bruce or Pete are running away with this game over there in the back corner of the table. Meanwhile, we're kid cackling all the way.
Even like Group Hug, they probably would beyond Zedru, but like even like in blue and green where you're cheating things out naturally. Like imagine playing this. Imagine playing that, in Kinnan or like a Simic pile with like Galta in it at the top end, the new one, cheats out all your creatures. Or just like cascading things as well would probably benefit / discover might actually work.
So I think the cascade wouldn't work.
Discover
Cascade and Discover both are still casting the spell, and this won't. But I think there's a lot of ways now in the game today. Like in 2001, this was probably a pretty healthy stacks piece. But in 2024, there's enough ways to circumvent the clause that if you know it's coming and you know that it's in your deck for that reason, you can build this up to be a very asymmetrical effect and be pretty cool. At worst, it's a stacks effect that's going to slow down the table. At best, it's going to give you a significant advantage, and your opponents are going to be unsure if they should remove it or not. So I kind of like it. I think it's pretty neat.
Also works with like recursion strategies too, because if you're able to cast a a hefty recursion target, like a ancient brass dragon. Right?
Right.
Now for at least for your turn, they can't cast kill black spells. Or
No, no, for sure.
they can't cast like D-Spark.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So
Yeah,
like
no, for
stuff like that. Or like say you're in Dimir, right? So you cast like a blue creature or like a blue card and then like a draw effect, maybe Brainstorm. They can't counter your stuff now. Right?
oh, it's true.
So it's just a weird interaction. But I don't think it's like in the right deck it's probably good at. I think most of the time you're gonna cut this card for something else.
Yeah, I think most of the time this is not going to be something that's going to be particularly sought after, but it's good. It is pretty neat, I have to say. Pretty cool card. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on. So you were telling us that you went to the store and you played F&M and you drafted Return to Ravnica, which
so you want to hear about it?
Let's hear the story. Everyone loves story time with Pete. So everyone get your popcorn, get cozy. Yeah. Let's hear story time with Pete.
Get your Raisinets if anybody ever eats those anymore. I don't know.
Oh, those are so
peanuts,
good. I love Raisinets.
They're
not the peanuts.
Delicious. But anyways.
I've been trained in school, no peanuts, because people are allergic to that stuff. So
sure. My girlfriend's also allergic, so that's funny you say that. I have to eat them when she's not around.
but a good Raisinette, I'm in for a good Raisinette.
So my good friend from the local area, he hadn't drafted in several months, and we like to go 3 or 4 times a year. Especially when I'm back in town, we like to go to the one of our favorite stores. Actually, I'm going to shout them out because they are really, really good. They also do comics. Big order comics online. They're called Just Action Figures and Comics. They're like right off of the Turnpike in eastern Pennsylvania, and they have a really nice Friday Night Magic scene. Actually, we're very blessed. We have a really nice crew of people that like to draft some really janky stuff, but also they know the importance of how to play, and they usually invite people. And they have a very inviting nature, so we like to go there. So they had drafted MKM for the last, 6 weeks because it's been out for how many weeks now? And they're all getting tired of it. They're all getting tired of it. So last week they did the Chaos Draft. This week we were there and I'm like, I really don't like Chaos Drafts personally because sometimes somebody opens a $20 rare and other people open nothing of value because you have to really decide what packs you want to potentially synergize with. So it's all sort of up in the air, right? I can't force the synergy as easily, which bothers me because that's what I'm trying to do in Limited, but in this particular case, they had never drafted Return to Ravnica before, and they had a big case of it that had not been used. And it was about the same amount of money as a MKM pack anyway, so it's an old set that not many people have played before in that store because they're a lot younger players. They're probably within the last 10 years. Within the last 10 years they started into the game. So,
you know what? That makes you feel really old because I remember playing Return to Ravnica Draft, and I'm like thinking, all right, this I'm not like, but now that's apparently a boomer set. So
well, not necessarily. I mean, like Terry, one of my good friends who drafted with us, he had played it, but he didn't remember any of the mechanics because it was so long ago for him to play it. Because he used to buy a box and split it with his friends and draft at home. He actually never would draft at F&M, so it's actually interesting. But basically, like it was fun because we were all super experienced at playing. So when we drafted, we thought the games were going to go really slow because the power level is not as what it is now. There's not that many kill spells in that set. The removal's pretty bad. The creatures are decent but not great. It's like a 7-mana 5/5 trample and reach is like the best green creature. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So like the overall depth is not that good. And the only like money cards are the shocklands in the set for the most part. So most people were like, we're not really sure what the heck's in this set anymore. I remembered one mechanic from the set. I really wanted to try it if I got the chance to. So I pivoted into that color combination and that mechanic. It was called Scavenge. It's not a very good mechanic for Commander, but it would exile a creature card from your graveyard, and its power, you'd put that many +1/+1 counters onto a creature on the battlefield that you controlled. Very, very slow, very bad, sort of like quote-unquote bad mechanic, but with the right cards in that set, you could really house people. So I was pleasured to do a 2-2. I had a lot of fun with it. The guy who won had a nasty Desecration Demon deck with Rakdos, which I find hilarious.
You said I'm pleasured. You were pleasantly surprised. You weren't pleasured.
I was pleasantly surprised. I apologize. That's what I meant to say. Now, oh my god. I'm not trying to be a Freud guy, because anyway, you suck. You suck, Bruce. You're terrible.
Dude,
You ruined it.
I heard it. You said it. I
You
just heard
soiled
it. Anyway.
it. You soiled it, but it's fine.
All right.
So anyway, so it just reminded me, like, a lot of these older sets, and then in general, limited really teaches us gameplay, like techniques that we can apply to Commander, like holding cards and stuff. And we'll get into that in a moment. But what's your experience? I mean, I know our experiences with limited has been rather different. I think. I mean, you've been playing a lot longer than I have, and I understand that it's evolved over time. I know with 4 kids, you probably haven't done a limited draft in a long time.
So I haven't had a chance to draft like a current standard set in quite a while. I mean, I did get a chance to draft some Lord of the Rings over the summer when I was away at summer camp with some of the counselors. Now, I would hardly call those players invested Magic players. They were doing it for something fun to do on a weeknight when the campers were all in bed, and most of them were there just because they're Lord of the Rings fans. And so they knew how to play Magic. Lord of the Rings plus their favorite book come together. We drafted. And my experience was a little bit lopsided because they're like, we want to do dedicated 2-color archetypes, and they left the 5-color goofy legend deck that I got to pick. And I'm like, so 2 weeks in a row I drafted 5-color legends with like Aragorns and Saurons and ridiculous stuff.
You were just smashing them.
Yeah, so I was sort of like living the dream while my opponents were playing streamlined 2-color decks and didn't quite understand why some of the archetypes didn't work, because if you remember that set, some of the archetypes didn't work. So it's probably been a good long while since I've played a lot of Limited, except for playing it on Arena, where when you play on Arena, it's a very different environment. You have to assume whenever I'm playing on Arena that whoever you're playing knows what the heck they're doing. That's why they're playing on Arena. They're not they're not Joe Schmoes who don't know what's up. So I feel like there's a lot of information asymmetry when you're playing in person with people that could result in a draft format being very different in paper than it is in digital.
Sorry. The other thing I was just going to say about the in paper versus digital is I've noticed that I've made less mistakes in paper because I have more time I feel like I have more time to actually think. Where like in Arena you got that timer, so you have to make really split decisions, but the timer actually makes you better at making split decisions, like quick decisions. Yes. So it's like good and bad for both paper and that, because nobody wants to sit there for 30 minutes to decide what you're about to do.
Yes.
But I guess moral of the story was we were done an hour and a half early, so we all left at like 8:30 p.m. It was hilarious.
What?
We started at 6. We started at 6, and everybody was done by like 8:30. Everybody. It was great.
Now, was that because you had a 6-man pod, or was that because
probably, and because we're all very good at, like, we're all pretty like much pretty talent, like we're all like at the same talent level in terms of how to play the game. Like everybody there knows what the heck they're doing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, they know how to pivot. They know how to draft. They have a lot of experience overall drafting. Where like we didn't have to explain to anybody like what the mechanics did, because as soon as you read the card, you understood what they did. You know?
Right. Okay.
So I think that was the other reason. The 6-man pod also makes it a lot quicker, but we got the dude. Like most of the games went 2-0, which was kind of crazy too. That's unheard of.
Oh, okay, yeah, that is a little surprising. I remember my recollection of that format that it was slower. I drafted a lot more of Gatecrash than I did of RTR, but and it was pretty fast because you had a lot more of the aggressive guilds in RTR. Sorry, in Gatecrash, because you had Gruul and Boros that were both there. So those tended to be pretty aggressive and assertive as a format. But no, like there's no doubt that drafting from Gatecrash and Theros and then Khans of Tarkir is very different from drafting what we're currently doing in paper in MKM or soon to be Outlaws at Thunder Junction, where I'm anticipating the format to be again quite streamlined. Not a lot of really poor like there are some really objectively bad cards in RTR draft. Like there's definitely definitely making playables is a concern. Whereas in today's Magic game, like there's so many good playable commons and uncommons that it's really a question of asking yourself, is this common or uncommon like the right fit for what I'm doing? Not is it playable? It's
Right.
certainly playable. Is it actually the right fit? And so
And that's where we can. That's where we can translate it to Commander, right? It's like because
yes.
back in 10, 15 years ago, when the format was young, it was like really about just sort of playing cards because you could play them, and you couldn't really play them in Standard or in Modern or whatever they had at that time because it just wasn't possible to play. And you were like, I want to play these janky cards because I can't play them anywhere else. But now it's like instead of is the card being able to be played, we're looking at it as does it fit for our strategy? Does it fit for our synergies? Does it take up a slot for something else that we might need overall to be flexible with our deck or something? Which I like that. I like that sort of translation. So, without further ado, what do you think to start out? I mean, there's many pros and cons with this sort of thinking and this sort of format with limited. Not everybody is able to afford it sometimes, to go out on a Friday.
Yeah, well, that's true. So, I mean, I think in terms of like actual getting your money's worth out of the draft experience, I think is pretty achievable because I know one looks at opening your packs and like, did I open up enough money in my packs? No. Think of it this way, folks. Your draft experience is the cards plus the chance to play 3 or 4 matches against other players and socially. Like it's like buying a ticket to the movies, right? And people happily spend $15 to go to the movies. You're paying $15 or $20 to get into your event. And you happen to get cards at your movie tonight, which is a different way of thinking about your Magic game. So I think in terms of like raw entertainment dollar, I think it's a good way for us to enjoy playing the game. I really like playing limited because it forces me to be very tight in the way that I play technically. So I have to make sure that I communicate to my real life opponent what I'm doing as I go through stages and phases of the game. That I'm very careful about how I draw cards. That I'm not taking illegal game actions unbeknownst to myself. And I think those are all really good habits to form and develop and maintain because you can see it very easily when you go to play at a commander pod and the guy you're playing with may or may not. And I shouldn't use the term guy, but the person you're playing with may or may not be as familiar with the stages of your turn and the phases and what happens as you move from one phase to the next. We get just the result. Sometimes commander play can get sloppy, and then that's how mistakes get made. And we don't necessarily, and that does impact how the game gets played, and people get frustrated and salty and upset that they're not able to do the things they do. Where if everyone came to the table with a pretty sound technical understanding of how to play a game of Magic because they've played enough limited against people in a live setting and had rule enforcement where they actually had to respect, all that. It would really make Commander be a lot
rules. Well, timing rules and just, when are you allowed to respond on the stack to certain things? Like, say you sack something at instant speed, there's a way that you can bolt something in response to something else getting killed or whatever. So even my guy was playing one of my good friends, Mark. He was playing this like he had 2 Codex Shredders in his deck, so he was milling people out, and it was just like such a janky way to win a limited game. But in Commander, that's an idea as well that people have explored very extensively.
Yes.
So you can take an idea that you made in limited and turn it into a commander deck, and you could have some fun with that as well.
Yeah.
And then, like the thinking process, I think if we go to the thinking process of playing the game, technically, you're on a clock, right? Where commander, you're not on a clock, and you really have to make decisions, and each decision impacts your next decision. Where in Commander, sometimes you might not get punished for that bad decision that you made. Or, on the flip side, you might get lucky and get rewarded for a decision that you made that you probably didn't deserve to get rewarded for, or somebody else made. So, Yeah, I think overall playing Magic in general, playing more of it makes you more understanding of the game, right? Like anything else. Like you
Yeah,
practice playing, but you know, it's the closest you could get to the competitive side of it without
yeah. Like, I mean, yeah.
the
I don't.
true competitive side of it. If that, because like command CDH is still competitive, but more like the intention of how, like the best
Yes.
of
Yeah.
three idea. You know what I mean?
No, I agree.
Versus,
So, it is really good for us as players to have that experience so that we can engage in the game in that way. Whereas sometimes commander players try and stay away from it because we don't like the feeling of having to step into that more rigid
cutthroat,
room.
the cutthroat nature of it, right? I
Yeah,
guess.
but sometimes it's healthy for us to step out of our comfort zone and to do something different and diversify our play experience. So I think playing limited. I think lots of people should play more limited. Limited is, I think, is a really terrific way to enjoy the game. But on top of that, I think it's a really integral part of the whole sort of ecosystem of Magic. Whereas to how you teach people how to play, and I always kind of liked draft because it felt like it was an equal playing field.
Sure,
If
it's level.
because it didn't matter who had spent more money on their deck. If we all spent the same amount of money to play tonight, and I could open some awesome cards and I could win the draft, even if I'm not necessarily the most skilled player. If I happen to find some cool cards and could have put together a really cool deck, then I can still hang with the very best players in the world, maybe. So I always like that from an equalizing standpoint.
I've noticed my card evaluation overall has gotten better, like in both formats. So like Commander, in terms of evaluating what I think is actually like good enough, but then Limited, it's like a different story because that rare that you might want for your Commander deck actually doesn't work for the Limited
I have all the
archetype.
time.
Right, so like,
That
there's
was all the time.
plenty of times where somebody takes like a 5 mana instant that does something, but then they realize later on, like, oh man, like that's too slow for what I'm trying to do. I've done that plenty times where like I took Entomb first pack on the remastered set with Entomb, and it had some other Chase Commander cards in it, and like my deck was awful. It was a blue-black deck with no win cons.
Yeah.
And I should have just went black-green because green was open, and I didn't realize that until like at the end, and I was kicking myself, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it makes you think differently in terms of how to play, and then you can translate that to Commander because thinking about what people are doing every turn translates really well to predicting what they're going to do. And then if you're able to sort of have an idea of what they're going to do, you can take advantage of that too. It's not perfect because you don't know what everybody's playing all the time. But I've noticed I've gotten better at predicting. Like, okay, if they're in blue black, what am I gonna see on turn 2? You know what I mean? What am I gonna see on turn 5?
I will speak to that idea of the card evaluation because I will say that I'm not sure that my card evaluation has actually improved. I have created two sorts of worlds of card evaluation because there's the drafter Bruce who drafts and looks at a card like I don't know, because I was just drafting Brothers. Was it Brothers War?
Rexy all will be one.
Yeah, all be one is the one that's right now on as a quick draft. And I was just looking for something quick to do, and like Hexgold Slash is an awesome common in that set. It is a terrific because it wipes out all the toxic creatures. But if I'm looking at like objectively for a commander deck, Hexgold Slash doesn't do enough. I've had to like look at my deck and say, you know what, that card might be a terrific draft common, but that common doesn't translate to playing in commander. So I've had to adjust the way I evaluate cards based on what I do, and I'm discovering that my drafter brain, because I started playing draft long before I started playing commander, is still more prevalent than my commander brain. And I'm also, because I've played draft longer than I played commander, I still am in the mindset of I'm looking for 2-for-1s and incremental advantage and and grinding it out with my opponent, because lots of times when you were playing those draft formats in the years where I was learning to draft, that is what you had to do. You had to grind. There wasn't. I find now there's less grinding and board stalls are different. But anyway,
I've looked at it as more so because there is that divide. I've noticed that especially when I'm drafting limited versus playing commander, what cards should be played for me in this particular deck, whatever. I've looked at it as no card is bad, because we like to like cross cards out very quickly before we actually like test them, or we like see if we can play them. And I found I've been more open to figuring out like what fits a particular deck, even if it's not technically a good card. That's where I've sort of looked at it as an evaluation standpoint.
Okay.
Because I've taught myself, because I used to overvalue 3-drops all the time in draft. I used to draft like 8 of them, right? And that was just too much, or whatever. And I didn't have enough 2-drops, right? So now I take that underperforming 2-drop, but sometimes it does what it needs, just enough of what it needs for the limited deck to actually run. Like I had like 8 2-drops. I had a few 1-drops. I had like 3 or 4 3-drops and like 4 4-drops, and then 2 or 3 top end cards for the Golgari deck, and it was a good curve. It wasn't perfect, of course, but it was a good curve. But in the past, I would have probably overvalued something else. You know what I mean?
And Sewer Shambler is a hell of a drug in that set. Oh my goodness. Anyway, it brings back memories. Anyway.
Yeah, so overall, I guess the closest limited format that we have as Commander players is Cube, right?
Yes,
and that's our favorite thing to do when we're not playing Commander. Me and you is to Cube draft. Ideally, that's what we would love to do as much as possible. We had a blast with your brother and some of your good friends as well. So that was I still remember that from it's been almost 6 months now or whatever it is. Almost been a year actually.
It's been close to a year now. Yeah. But yeah, no. So I think for our audience, if you haven't had an opportunity to experiment with playing a high-powered cube, it's much closer to playing Commander than you might think. A lot of people are a little bit concerned about moving into playing cube because they feel like there's a high threshold to entry in terms of knowledge and whatnot. But if you're playing Commander on a semi-regular basis with some of the high-powered cards that are being printed in new sets, then you're going to be able to pick up pretty easily what is happening in a cube, I think. You're going to be pretty familiar with some of the strategies pretty quickly, and what some of the older cards that you may not be as familiar with offer, so that you're going to find the power level doesn't feel that dissimilar from what can happen in a Commander pod. So I think there's a lot of overlap between the two formats that lend itself to helping a Commander player improve at their gameplay when they go to play something else. Yep.
I always when I heard Vintage for the first time, someone explained it to me, I thought it was like voodoo. You know what I mean? I was like, like they're playing all these like really broken cards that some of them we can't even play in Commander because they're banned. But now we know why they're banned. You know what I mean? We have that sort of underlying context. Because when you channel an Eldrazi on turn 2, or turn 1 sometimes, when you have your Mox out on turn 1, that's always super fun. And I love, my favorite is, I'm a sucker for the Reanimator deck lists. I love doing the Archon of Cruelty turn 2. So it's made me have some more fun in my Commander pods, because I've gotten out on turn 4 with a less broken version of that sort of idea. But I really really enjoy the weirdness that you can do with it. You can break parity, which we like to do in Commander a lot. We can, like, what's the weirdest deck you've drafted in the last few weeks? You were telling me about that one channel deck, but was there anything else that?
Well, I mean, I haven't done a lot, but I mean, oftentimes I find that when I have drafted Cube, it's things like I'll lean into playing the Kinnan deck. There's no one else that wants to play Kinnan. I'm quite happy to play Kinnan and try and create the mana necessary to cheat giant monsters into play with Kinnan. I surprised one. Like, I was playing, with my brother and some friends, and the Kinnan and Simic archetype was wide open for me to exploit. So I was able to gobble up all the pieces I needed, and was able to, I went 3-0 actually, because of the fact that no one anticipated Simic green fatties smashing them upside the head.
Sure.
I've had another one where I was playing a cube where now it's a little bit older, but I had a card where I had my first pick one, pack one was Time Walk, which was always a good way to start, and I had a Jace Vryn's Prodigy in my in my deck, so I was able to flash Black Jace for this Prodigy to seal a win, where I was able to attack in with a number of big fat monsters. So you can get some really fun interactions and things that you wouldn't normally do. That I really appreciate, and helps you understand when you do see other people do like pretty nasty things to people, like, oh yeah, so we're gonna lock you out with Wasteland and Strip Mine with a Ramanap excavator and a fast bond.
Yeah, it's brutal. The other, I remember I drafted blue-white control against you, and I remember that was rough.
Yeah,
because it was just, you couldn't do anything. I was just flickering all my stuff and bringing them back. The underrated deck that I drafted a while ago was Golgari midrange, because not many people draft that as like, it's a very awkward color combination sometimes. But I drafted it with like Sheoldred, and then I just went ham with the Hermit Druid and the at the top end I played Craterhoof. So it was like a very simple beatdown strategy, similar to the Simic pile that you probably had. Beyond, like, it was just, turn 1, turn 2 ramp creature, turn 3 value, and turn 4, 5, 6 you go for the win. But
yeah, you go for the big things. Yeah,
but like, I like it because you can see how the colors interact together, and then we can translate that to Commander, right? Because you can't play Fast Bond in Commander, but you can definitely do some very mean things with Ramnap and Wasteland if you wanted to. I don't encourage it all the time, but if you need to blow up somebody's value land, I mean, that's probably not a terrible thing to do every so often.
Right.
And just looking at the colors, in a vacuum, just how much you can do with that. And in a greater, we're sort of amplifying it, right? Because I feel like the turn cycle for Vintage is half of the turn cycle for Commander. You know what I mean? Like the aggro decks, you can really, really develop a massive board state in Commander, where in Limited, in that sort of idea, you only need maybe 5 creatures, like decent creatures out to swing the tide in your favor. But that microcosm idea of, okay, this is what an aggro deck kind of looks like. This is how I can bring it to this color combination. Even so, you can break parity that way too.
Another thing that I really like about playing in Vintage or Cube is how you oftentimes end up having to construct complex mana bases, which in Commander is really important. And we often, I would say most of us don't do it properly when we're building our Commander decks, and we have high mana cost requirements or lots of different colored pips. And so playing I find in Vintage Cube is a really great opportunity for us to experiment with how to build those mana bases, so we can take that experience back to us to Commander.
One of the guys I like to watch on YouTube, he's very famous for limited drafting, Nummy. But he always values lands highly, where other drafters just value like consistency on other cards higher. And the reason being, it's like you got to be able to play your cards. So even if, like, I really value fetch lands in general. Like when I first started playing Commander more seriously, when I wanted to invest a little bit more into the game, I had a good guy that I knew that told me a long time ago, lands make the deck. And he's totally right. You know what I mean? Lands always make the deck. So I knew guys spending hundreds of dollars on the chase rares and mythics and stuff. But at the end of the day, if you can't play those cards, then why are you playing those cards in general? Like if you're unable to curve out for those cards, like playing Sheoldred and not able to play it on turn 4 seems kind of bad. Again, that card can go out of control by itself, but looking at Limited, if you're able to play your cards, you're usually able to win the game. Most times in Commander now, if you play more cards than your opponent, 9 times out of 10, you're going to win the game. Unless there's a board wipe or something like that. But you have more mana, you have more resources, usually you're going to win the game.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That all tracks, and you're absolutely right. And so, it speaks to the importance of fetch lands, but also the triomes or shock lands. Like we've really had a glut of really excellent lands get printed in the last sort of 3 to 5 years. And I would say that people sort of panned the lands from the Surveil lands from MKM as being not very good until, oh wait, I can fetch for them, and that's yet another fetchable target. Right. That's a big game, and so That is
And the
all
fact
stuff
that
that.
it top decks, like it manipulates your top deck like the Scrylands do, and it's easily fetchable when the Scrylands are not fetchable most of the
Yeah.
time. And then if we go back to limited as well, like the safest pick sometimes in the draft first pick is the land because you might be able to just play it. It's a free roll. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where like in Commander we take advantage of like we have mana rocks and other things we can play, but sometimes they're not even necessary if we have good fixing. Sometimes that's that just depends on the kind of deck you're playing. But looking at these lessons you can take away from this other format like Cube, where everybody that plays Cube, I would say, for the most part, has played it enough times, knows exactly like what archetypes might be open. And a lot of people take the lands very quickly if they can't get a Power 9 card, right?
Yes. So I would say like the essentially the heuristic becomes you're looking for a Power 9 card, Mana Crypt, Sol Ring, or a few other select really premium top end cards, or you're taking a fetch land. That's sort of like the de facto place to start.
Yeah, so like for me, my Power 9 is like lands that plow other lands. Like in Commander, I mean. So like our Power 9 really is fetch lands and shocks, and I would say like just general fixing. That's why Sol Ring is so good, right? Or that's why like Arcane Signet is played in almost every single deck out there. So yeah, no, I think just playing more different kinds of formats can help a Commander player realize like synergy they didn't realize in their decks as well with certain cards. I've definitely noticed that with like some of the mono white aggro, or like some of the mono red aggro, where it's like, oh wow, like even if Magna dies, I still get a treasure, so I can play another card. Like that's pretty powerful. So
yeah, no, for sure. I also am of the opinion that playing Cube and draft formats generally are really good for helping you find an alternate way to get to your win. So you may draft your deck in such a way that you have a primary win condition, and but sometimes that primary win condition gets milled or destroyed quickly, and you need to find another way to get your victory. And the power level of Cube is often suitably high that there are other ways to create the power you need to get the victory. You just need to think differently. And I think that's a really important strategy that we can take with us into Commander, because frequently people are going to derail your primary strategy.
all the time.
Let's say you're playing a strategy that was very commander heavy, where you're going to play, I need my commander online in order for me to do the thing. Well, your opponents are going to target your commander very, very aggressively because they know that if they don't, you're going to start being able to run away with the game. Well, and you now need to plan B, an alternate way to get your win if you're going to be in this game for any length of time. So I think, Cube draft and just draft in general, but Cube draft in particular, really forces you to think about how are you going to get your win con, and what are you going to do to get the win if your primary source of way of winning is going to be derailed.
Yeah, and then even limited, where it's very limited as to I didn't mean to say it like that, but you know what I mean. It's very very like limited in what you're able to play. You have to think about like what I won a game by scavenging a creature to put 3 counters onto a 1/1 flyer with lifelink, and I was able to stabilize with a 1/1 with a 4/4 flyer, and that was my pseudo win con that I didn't realize until I had to do it to win the game.
Absolutely.
So yeah, again, like I really like that point because I used to build decks where I had one like win con and no fail safes to if it was like all or nothing.
Yeah,
now it's slowly
a super linear strategy. What you're talking there is a super linear strategy, and now you're having to diversify. More flexible. Exactly. So that's a great strategy to take forward with you and put in your back pocket. Like, let's be real. You're going to build your deck with that cool, like, primary line A victory, but if it gets derailed, it's good to be able to improvise and MacGyver a different way of doing it.
Sure. Yeah, and I really enjoy what people can do with these kinds of cards that I don't think about either in limited or in cube, where like that's the beauty of Commander is you get to see some people's thought processes and they're very unique to your own. And I enjoy that thinking too, because there's guys I know that they'll do 3-color piles all the time, and they do really well in draft because they're just good at sideboarding. And they've been playing they play every week, so obviously they do it all the time.
Yeah.
But it's really cool to see what they can do. Like I had a guy I played against who I've never beaten before, and I ended up beating him for the first time ever on Friday, and he always does 3-color piles, and he did a Bance Populate deck, and it was very strong. He just didn't curve out well enough as he would have liked. So it happens to the best of us, but overall, everyone, folks, play Cube, play some Limited if you get the chance. Just try it with some good friends, even maybe if you don't want to go to an LGS. Just buy a box with some friends and do it together, and I'm sure you'll have a good time, especially if you split the box as a group. So
yeah. Well, and if you are going to get to Cube, I do think that some of the experiences that you can have from the sort of the community that tends to like to build is it tends to be an environment that's less salty and more and more. Yeah, and the way laid back and supportive, because people, I've played with people who are new to Cube, and then like when we're drafting and we go, if you know the guy beside you is taking artifacts, and they leave the academy in the pack for you to look at, you're like, no, buddy, you're taking artifacts. You've taken 4 in a row. I know you have. Here's the academy. You want to
take that card because you want to play it, right?
Take the Flarian Academy. You actually want this card, and you may not know, but like that's the experience.
I remember I was like playing against your brother, and I felt bad because like in Commander sometimes you feel bad for pulling ahead and winning pretty sometimes, Yeah. Like I think. Because we're taught, like, I guess in this sort of social game, we're, like, taught, like, it has to be a close game all the time for some reason. Or sometimes that's just not the case.
Well, sometimes it doesn't happen that way.
You know what I mean? But, like, in Vintage especially, it's like, someone will just blow somebody else out, right? And there's nothing you can do about it. But your attitude is so positive because you're like, whoa, that was so cool. Like, you just channeled out that Eldrazi on turn 2. That's amazing. Or, like, and channels, like, you pay life into mana, and then you get to play colorless mana for free, basically. You pay your life total.
You play Oolong.
And you play a crazy big scary Eldrazi. Or like your brother was playing against me and he played the Splinter Twin combo, and I was like, he was beating me up and he goes, I'm sorry, Pete. And I go, don't be sorry, this is incredible. Like, I've never seen this happen before. So, like, this was just really cool, and it was cool. Like, he played, like, a Siege Gang Commander and just absolutely destroyed me with a bunch of little weenies. I just couldn't stabilize fast enough.
Yeah.
And it was just like, what are you going to do? Like, then he played Splinter Twin onto something. You know what he did? He took I had taken, because I knew someone was playing that combo, so I had Kiki Jiki, and he had, the infinite combo, the 5-mana card that takes a permanent and untaps it. So he took my Kiki in one of the games and then tapped it, and then won that way. And I thought that was hilarious. That was so funny. I'll never forget that. He goes, "I'm sorry, Pete, but that was probably the wrong card to play right now." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Boom," and I go, "Oh."
George and I were playing Cube the other night. We were drafting on the Magic the Gathering online, and so George has his account, and I'm following along on Discord, and we had drafted sort of an Oath of Druids deck where we're looking to cheat big things into play, and then we have a couple of reanimation tools in the deck too. And on turn 3. So we were on the draw. So our opponent on their started turn 3 played Dak Faden. We had no, and so since we had no artifacts in play, he +1 to make somebody draw 2, then discard 2, and he proceeded to make us draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. I'm not sure quite why, but he did. And so we quite happily pitched the Archon of Cruelty into our graveyard along with something else, and then promptly exhumed it on our next turn. And our opponent immediately conceded. They're like, "We lose." Like, okay, then on to game 2. And the stuff like that you won't see them too frequently. You might see it happen in Commander occasionally, but that's the sort of power level and interaction that you're going to encounter. That's going to force you to help you be a better player when you come to play Commander next, because you are not going to be surprised by some of the things that are going to happen. So
And then just looking at like cards overall, as we touched on earlier, playing just more, getting more acclimated with different cards and sets, and different styles of play just makes you better, well-rounded player as well. And you don't have to. You can gravitate to one strategy or another. Like for the life of me, I don't want to be a control player. Green is like my pet color in limited, but I always end up doing some sort of control-y-esque thing, or something mid-rangey, right? And I'm just like, why? Because I love my green decks in Commander, ironically enough. Those are the decks I play the most. So, I don't know what to tell you, Bruce. I'm just lost.
I think people should be, I think what we're telling people is they should play some more Cube. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, folks, there's lots of other benefits to be gained here. Some patience, just some fun, just a lot of different fun experiences you can have. If you have the opportunity to explore the idea of a cube, or you're interested in it, there's lots of great ways to engage in Cube without necessarily having to go invest in all the most expensive cards in the game. So it's getting increasingly accessible, I think, and more available as more people get exposed to it. And I think it shouldn't be something we shy away from just because it feels daunting or it feels scary. Like, if you embrace it as something cool and unique and fun to try, there's gains to be made for Commander players, and it's going to be a lot of fun while you do it.
Yeah, there's a few free websites which we'll put in the show notes. There's Cube Cobra, which you can make a free account, and you can just playtest draft, which is cool. Mm-hmm. There is MTGO, which I know you have to pay. Like, you don't have to pay, but you have to invest resources into it, like Arena. So those are two options that start out as being free. And then, honestly, most people I know just proxy everything. They'll just, split the cost of going to the post office and printing all of it out. And it's very reasonable to do. And most people, I say, wouldn't care. Some people do common cubes, uncommon cubes as well. And and even if you can't go to Friday Night Magic, of course, everyone's circumstances are different. Maybe you don't have a store close to you. The proxying is always welcomed and always a big part of this community. So we understand and we love it for its flexibility. You know what I mean? Yeah. Overall.
Yeah. Anyway, lots of fun. And I highly encourage you guys to go out there and try and see if there's somebody out there in your community that has a cube or wants to build a cube, and see if you can connect with them and see what sort of fun you can drum up together, causing some mayhem, flinging powerful spells all over the table.
Alrighty. Well, that's it for us, folks. Enjoy the rest of your holiday and have a good week.
Later, folks. Bye.
Peace.